Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems.
Sales is a difficult and often lonely business. Despite all of those meetings, lunches, and golf dates, each salesperson at the end of the day, or week, or month, is left alone with their quota and their commission check. If we didn't do so good, we can turn to our sales manager for help, if we dare. But this might show weakness and hurt our career. Perhaps we can try to get our coaching from podcasts. But Scott, we all know those can be spotty at best.
True.
So what can we do? Maybe we should consider investing in ourselves. So listen up as Scott and I discuss, do I need a sales coach, and other stimulating topics on episode 562 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
I'm looking forward to getting into that conversation about needing a sales coach. But before we do that, we're finishing up the last chapter of the book, chapter 11, continuing the journey from the book, What Great Sales People Do. So just as we wrap up the book, Bill, I'm kind of curious, what did you think overall about the book?
I like it. I'm not sure about the vulnerability part of it. Maybe that's part of it. But I do think that stories are illustrative. They make a broader point than just fact, benefit, nail down, the old Dale Carnegie process, which is good. I think they make us more human and they tie into people. But I would say you have to be careful. Don't make them lengthy. I've worked with some other people that they get into a story and it's 45 minutes of the sales call, and it was a little too much. Yeah. So 2 minutes is always a good number, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the story arc is really having a point. And when you have a point and there's a reason for the story, I think it becomes advantageous in a sales conversation with a prospect. I also think that metaphors are very powerful when it comes to convincing and persuading, because you're able to add some information into a context that somebody is able to understand or has used in the past in a different situation. So once you start to align the comfort of people making a decision in that area through a story or a metaphor, it ends up becoming a little bit more familiar with them, and with familiarity kind of breeds a comfort. So I think it, just like this book and other books that we've used, is you start to get into the final chapters and you start summarizing everything. So we're at the chapter where we're summarizing everything that's been shared in previous chapters. But so one thing that I really like about this chapter is it has an image on page 214 with a target with two outer rings to it, very similar to the Target logo, or very similar to Simon Sinek's, begin with why. So the center of the comfort zone is I am. The next ring as you're moving out is the learning zone. So we go from the comfort zone to the learning zone, and that is I can. And then the outer ring is the panic zone, which is I can't. So if we think about how we develop change, we might start from the outside of the circle. So it's I can't to I can, which means I've learned something. I'm in the learning zone, I can. And then I end up getting into the comfort zone, which is I am. And that's a great progression. Also, the other way is we stay in our comfort zone and we, I am, and then we need to be able to move outside of that to the learning zone to do something new and different. I can, but not step outside where we can't. And we end up kind of overanalyzing something and we get into an area that we just sabotage ourselves. So that was one area that I really liked in the book. Do you remember that image?
Yeah, I do. And I use a thing called the cycle of development. And we start off with having a need for information. Then we get some knowledge. And the real key, and that's what they talk about in this chapter, which I really like, is you need to go out and try things. You can't just read a book and never do anything with it. It doesn't do you any good. And if you put that process on a clock, at the 6 o'clock is the switch between knowledge and application. And I always tell people, Scott, I'm not an educator, I'm a trainer. And my job isn't for you to know something different. You can get that out of a book. My job is to help you to be able to do something different. So to move on to that edge of, you don't need me for the I can. You don't need a coach for the I can, what we're going to talk about later. You need a coach for that edge of moving from the I can to the I can't. I can't do this on my own. I don't understand it. I'm not sure of it. It makes me feel funny. I don't like telling stories. Whatever that edge is to move from, oh, I can do this on my own, to I can't do this. That's when you need somebody to help you over that hump. That's what Scott and I do in our coaching and our training is we help you understand something, practice it, and start to use it in a safe environment. So then you can move from that I can zone to that I can't zone and do something that challenges you. So
Well,
I think that's important. And that's what they talk about. Implementation, do it.
Yeah. Would it be safe to say that we could use a sentence, I can't do it alone, or I can't do it without some help? I mean, I think every successful person has a team or an individual or somebody that has inspired them or given them the courage and the confidence to apply the content, like you said, a trainer versus an educator. And I think sometimes we can also be inspirers and motivators at the same time. And it's a difference between knowledge and action. And I think there's some very, very great teachers that can teach content, but they don't really train people on how to take action. And there can be a lot of training programs that are a little bit more trying than training. And they're telling people, go out there and you got to sell more. You got to make your quota. We raise your quota, but we're not giving you any more tools to be able to create more effective behaviors. And we're just kind of pushing them and expecting them to, work harder and work smarter, whatever that means. But at the same time, we can demotivate them in pushing them without giving them the support. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But also in this chapter,
I want to mention, I want to tie off. I think you're absolutely right. This I can't zone is, and this won't fit in the circle, right? It's based on what I know and my capabilities right now and my level of fear. I can't do this. And that is the job sometimes of your sales manager. I wish that were, but they act more like the Alec Baldwin character in Glenn Ross. We can sometimes intimidate people into it, scream at them, yell at them, threaten them. That can move them out of, the I can to the I can't zone. But then they usually go to the I quit zone too these days. So I do think that there's better ways to do it, and that's what we can do in coaching and training. So go ahead to the next piece then. Sorry.
Yeah, next part is part 2, is the practice part of the chapter, and they talked about empathic listening. Again, I'm going to get that right. Thanks, Kevin Pleasant, for pointing that out to me. Empathic listening, which is awareness, number 1, to number 2, encouragement, to number 3, reflection. And I really like that process, is we become aware, we encourage through encouragement, and then we end up reflecting on that. And another thing that I like, the example that they talked about with the meaning is, really talking about awareness is working with the brain, and the left brain and the right brain. And I really like that they pointed out every time you have a meeting with somebody, you end up creating an agenda. And on that agenda is the facts. This is the logic. This is what to expect. And then that causes the left brain to be a little bit more relaxed and not as guarded and defensive, for the right brain to be able to wake up and to be able to listen to a story, and for a salesperson to be able to communicate a message to somebody that is receptive to listen to it. And when they listen to it, they're being open to it. So when we think about empathic listening, it's the awareness that we're creating within the conversation, the encouragement to be able to do something different, and then the reflection after we have all the information, what are we going to do differently? And I think when we have an influential conversation and we influence to motivate and encourage somebody to make a change versus teach them and share information with them, but that's separate from action and change.
Yeah, Scott, I know you like to use an agenda in your sales calls. I use my 10 questions as a way of guiding me through the areas that I want to go. I find it amazing that most salespeople go into a sales call with their catalog or their brochure, and that's their guide. And when you do that, instead of asking questions, instead of telling stories, instead of being a good listener, you're going to be encouraged to show what you have, and hope that they jump up and down and go, that's just what I've been looking for all my life. That answers my question. So go in there with something that will keep you on track. The other thing I know happens in sales calls is that the customer, the prospect, will get you off track. Sometimes we'll get ourselves off track. And whether you're using your questions as a guide or an agenda, as Scott suggests, you've got to stay on track. But put in, tell this story. right?
Yeah.
Put in these things into your guidelines so that you remember them. If you're not used to telling stories, if you're not used to being a good listener, you're going to have to do some things that encourage you to do those in a sales call. You have to do something different as a result of whether it's a podcast, a coach, or a book that you're reading. If you don't do anything different, nothing new will happen. So you have to build these in as something that you want to do. One of the things I do, and you and I have laughed about this, Scott, but when I'm in a meeting, I write SU at the top of my paper,
Yeah.
and that stands for shut up. And that's a message for me to shut up once in a while and let the customer talk. So, if that's what you need to do, do it. But figure out what it is that keeps you from selling well and make a change.
Yeah. At the bottom of my notepad is SW, 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 which stands for some will, some won't, so what, someone's waiting. And I need to find that person that's waiting. I need to find that prospect that is interested and curious about what we have to offer and is interested in having a conversation and to tell a story about what are they looking for and what have I done, and see if there's an overlap with it. And that's one of the things in this next chapter is the quote right out of the book. It says, "What I'd like to do today is share my story with you and hear yours. Then we can ask each other questions to see if there's a mutual opportunity." And I just love this collaboration within those two sentences. And this is really working together. This is collaborating on a common goal with a mutual commitment. And that is the power of a story. And I'll just add one more thing before I do a closing point on this, but they quoted Malcolm Gladwell, who's written a few books. In this book, The Outliers, for those of you that are familiar with it, it says that you really need to have about 10,000 hours of practice to be able to become proficient or professional. And they use Tiger Woods and Bill Gates as an example. And he writes, people who become high achievers usually have parents who allow their children to concentrate on and spend extraordinary amounts of time on an activity that makes them happiest in what they wish they want to excel in. And that's just a powerful statement, and reminds me of Dr. Jordan Peterson's book. He's got a chapter on there saying, never interrupt a kid when he's skateboarding. And the kid is trying to figure it out. They're really trying to get a start of those 10,000 hours. And the same thing with salespeople is we have to try something new and different. We need to prepare. We need to take some consideration, and we need to have the guts and courage to apply it. And I'm not, proposing that we do anything reckless or careless. We have to be intentional in our actions. But as the market changes, we have to change how we approach our prospects. And stories are very powerful because, again, they appeal to the right side of the brain where emotions are made. As we start to close on the topic here, we need to keep in mind that people judge us based on our actions. We judge ourselves based on our intentions. So intention is one thing, action is another thing. And we have to we write the story like we write the songs, in the words of Barry Manilow. For those of you who knew who Barry Manilow is, raise your hand.
Well, he's not dead.
He's not dead yet. No, but there are some people who don't know Barry Manilow. And when I wrote that out, I write the story. I thought I write the songs by Barry Manilow.
We're now getting a look at Scott's music catalog.
We could look it up. Barry Manilow. All right. Any closing thoughts on this one, Bill?
I would just reinforce this last chapter. Go out and do something different. Don't continue to do what you've done. They've summarized it all in this last chapter. Use it. Go out and use it. Try the stories. If it's not comfortable with you, you're going to have to do something to overcome that lack of comfort.
All right. Our next book is How to Win Friends and Influence People. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. I'm sure many of you have read it. Bill and I are going to go through it, and we're going to share what we think of it on the episodes in the future. So we'll start that book in 2 weeks.
That's right, because we're going to have a guest next week. So looking forward to that. All right. Our topic for today, do I need a sales coach? So I've got a process here I want to go through with you. What are the challenges we face? What can we get from coaching, or what are the things that tell us that we should be coaching? And then what can we get from a coach? How will they help us? So what are the challenges we face when we want to grow our sales capability? We just talked about getting better in sales and we want to grow, but there's some barriers that we face that keep us from growing. And one of the ones that I find the most often is salespeople believe they already know everything they need to be successful.
Yeah.
We run into this all the time. I know you do. We've talked about this in our classes with salespeople. I've seen it all before. I've heard this before. This is nothing new. What makes you think you're doing it, though? If your sales aren't doing well and you know everything, it's in the implementation that you're falling down.
Mm-hmm. And change begins with wonder. So as the market's changing, are we wondering if there's a better way? And just because you finish the training and the onboarding program doesn't mean that the learning stops.
That's
And
right.
it continues. So we need to be able to find a place to be able to get the information. Sometimes that's a person.
The second one we run into is that we don't believe that there's a return on investment to the time and money we might invest. So whether it's buying a book or listening to a podcast, which is fairly inexpensive, or getting a coach or taking a class, we don't really believe, if we don't do it, we must not believe it's valuable, right? It's not worth the time and money.
It can be hard to measure. How do we measure that? How do we measure a positive attitude? There's nothing on the financial spreadsheet to be able to measure a positive attitude, but books and podcasts can really have an impact on your behavior through an attitude that you have.
Yeah, let me tell you a quick story on that. So when I started in sales, I was in a retail store. I started my first retail store. I took over a store in 1980, and they sent me to the Dale Carnegie class, speaking of the book we're going to read. Mm. And it was a good class. It was 14 weeks at the time. I think it's 12 weeks now. And I was going through the process, and I really didn't know what was going on. And the postman came into my store every day. And one day he came in, he said, "How you doing, Bill?" And I said, "I'm doing terrific." He goes, "What's different about you? You're always terrific now, and it didn't used to be that way." Mm. And the only thing, I was about halfway through the Dale Carnegie class where they work on attitude a lot, and I was changing my attitude. And I learned I got the ROI right away on that. Mm-hmm. Because it was being seen by other people that my attitude, and your thought on attitude made me think about that. But we're not really totally the best we can be if we don't make some changes. All right, number 3, belief. We need to believe that the person we choose as a coach can help us improve and sell and or close more effectively. So not only do we need to believe the process can work and that I need something, but that the person I choose can actually help me get better.
Right. And this is sometimes different between somebody who is successful at sales or is a great coach in encouraging and training and coaching others how to be a great salesperson. So sometimes, great football players do not make great coaches, just like great salespeople do not make great sales managers. But when we look at a coach, you need to be able to determine, does this person have the experience to be able to talk about the industry knowledge that I need? Or can I relate to this person on kind of an emotional or an intellectual level that I believe that they can encourage me, they can support me in breaking through some of my conceptual barriers, that I can become a better salesperson just through the attitude and the beliefs, the soft skills versus the hard skills. So there's 2 types of coaching and training, hard skills versus soft skills. So it's very true.
I'm a big Twins fan, and I was a fan of Kirby Puckett before he passed away. And I remember watching an interview with him, and they said, "Kirby, how come you hit the ball so well?" He goes, "It's just that big, man. Just hit it. It's just that big."
Yeah.
And I thought, what a great coaching advice that would be. Just hit the ball. and when you look at a lot of the great coaches, they usually came up and spent 2 years in the major league, hanging on with their bare fingers, right, hitting 250, but they had everything. They didn't have the natural talent, but they learned everything they needed to learn to just stay in for a couple of years. And I think of some of the Twin coaches that were like that. And so sometimes we have to have failed to become a good coach, because we know what it takes to succeed, and the natural talents can't always do that. All right. What else do I need? Another challenge. I need to find the resources to get started, which is time and money. No matter how much I decide, no matter what I decide, I'm going to have to put some effort into it, some time, perhaps, to an hour a week to get coached, pretty expensive, and some money. Coaches can cost $200, $300, $400 an hour. So finding those resources to get started, time and money, can be difficult, but it can pay off very quickly for you.
I think a great way to test that is their level of commitment of somebody that wants to be coached. If you want to be coached, if you're thinking about working with the coach, start by committing an hour a day to your own personal and professional development. Do that on your own to a level where you are not able to get to the next level without working with somebody else, and somebody else that's maybe a little bit farther ahead on the path. Maybe they've got a little bit more experience and are able to work with you to get you to that next level. As you get to that next level, then commit an hour a day to your own personal and professional development within that. But if you're not willing to make the time to develop yourself, then it's not worth spending the money. And the time is going to cost you a lot more than the money that you end up investing in a coach, but you have to commit to the time.
Well, I think I would disagree with you slightly on that, Scott.
Okay.
And if I were going to get better on my own, I would probably have done it by now.
Right.
The challenge and what coaching brings to you sometimes to the table is, I made this effort, or put this money in, or my company put this money in for a coach. Now I'm going to meet with them and I'm going to do something with them. And then your coach is going to hold you accountable to making some of the changes. And quite often for people, we need that outside accountability. We need that commitment from the outside to help us to move. It may take me forever to decide to take that college class, but once I start it, now I'm committed to the process. So your idea of an hour a week, I think, is the best and cheapest way to do it, but many people just don't do it.
Yeah,
so sometimes it's that commitment. And then number 5, a challenge, you're just unwilling to invest in yourself. You just don't believe you can get better. You don't believe you can move from that I can through the I can't to do the things that are very difficult to do. And I think you need to overcome that.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like when you go to the health club and you invest in a personal trainer and you spend an hour with them and you're just absolutely wiped out that you need to spend 2 hours in the hot tub just to relax. Don't go home and eat a big bowl of ice cream. And that's
my reward.
It's so easy to do that. And man, I know how fattening ice cream is, which is why I don't keep it in the house. But I mean, it's like, invest in yourself, but know that when you're spending money, you got to create a holistic approach in how you approach life every waking moment. So, very true.
All right, now I'm going to go through this next set pretty quickly here, because this is some of the things that you should understand that are highlighting the fact that maybe you need a coach. All right. So you're not hitting your sales goals, right? If you're not hitting your sales goals and you used to hit your sales goals, you might need a coach, right? That's kind of you might know you're a redneck, right?
Yeah, that's just what I thought of, Bill, when you said that. Folks, you're not alone if that's what you thought of too.
All right. If your sales funnel is clogged up with a lot of old prospects, you might need a sales coach. I didn't figure this was going to run that way, but now I like it.
One coming, Bill,
now I'm doing this. All right. If your sales cycle is getting longer and longer, and your customers are starting to grow a beard, you might need a sales coach.
Okay.
If you hate your sales process, or you don't have a sales process, or you don't even know what it means to have a sales process, Scott,
you may need a sales coach.
You might need a sales coach. All right. If you're not getting from conversations to calls, from calls to appointment, from appointments to prospects, from prospects to close, Scott,
well, you might need a sales coach.
You definitely need a sales coach.
Right.
If you're unable to make connections between prospects' needs and your products or service, or differentiate yourself from your competition, you might need a sales coach. If you find yourself becoming, if you find your product or service becoming commoditized, meaning they're not looking for any value from you, Scott.
Yep. You might need a sales coach.
And if your time management sucks and you can't get motivated and you're stalled doing the same old crap every day,
take better medication.
No. You need a sales coach.
You need a sales coach.
You need a sales coach. Okay. So let's talk about, importantly here, how a sales coach can help you get past some of these issues. And this is kind of what we've been talking about when we're talking about implementation. We're talking about moving from the I can to the I can't level.
Yeah.
We're doing the things that are difficult for you to do, getting motivated. These are the things a sales coach can do. So let's talk about these in a little bit more depth. And I don't have a Jeff Foxworthy program
Punchline,
for these.
huh?
Yeah, no. So first of all, they're going to help you analyze your goals and your sales expectations. Now, sometimes when we're given our goals by our boss, we look at those, every year, right? 10% more because you were only working 90% last year.
Right.
Somebody can come in from the outside and help you look at those goals and sales expectations in a different way, in a way that you haven't looked at them. Sometimes we get caught in our own paradigms that say, well, gee, I worked really hard last year. I talked to everybody I could possibly talk to, and I don't have any, I don't know where these new sales are going to come from. All right, number two, they're going to help you find new ways to approach old problems. We get caught in the same way of doing things, the same way of handling a problem, the same way of handling an issue, the same way of looking at our territory. And a coach can come in and let you look at that in a new way.
I think one thing that's really important in this topic is there are a lot of training departments that do not evolve. One of the chapters in my book, Taking Off into the Wind, is do you live in a Dead Sea or a Sea of Galilee culture? Nothing lives in the Dead Sea. And there are a lot of training programs that I'm working with a client right now that is a salesperson that is spending money on their own to be able to improve their sales skills because they feel that their sales manager is critiquing them and not coaching them. And the sales techniques and the process they're using within that company are from the 80s, and they're not effective, and they're not starting the conversations. But the salesperson is constantly being critiqued based on old practices and not being coached on today's marketplace. This is very common. And when you invite somebody in from outside the company, you see a perspective that is more relevant to today's market versus something that a system that some company bought in the 80s that they've subscribed to and invested in, and they still haven't gotten the return on investment on the sales training program. So we're going to keep using it until we get our money back. In reality, we're losing all these sales and opportunities in the future because we're not selling in today's marketplace.
Well,
I digress.
I think it's easy to get ourselves caught into a process that gets left behind. And you and I are forced to look at things in a new way all the time because we work with new customers. But this lack of impetus happens not just to you sitting down in the morning wanting to make your sales calls, but it happens to a training department who doesn't really want to look at a new way of doing things. Things seem to be working okay the way they are. So
right.
All right, let's go to number 3. They're going to help you get a new perspective on your issues. They're going to help you take a look at your own personal issues. Why am I demotivated? Why am I bored? Why am I not getting customers? Why can't I convert things the way that I used to? A sales coach is going to help you look at those from a different way by bringing in new ideas, new ways of doing things. And I think that's really important, to look at things in a different way about our own personal issues. Sometimes we get caught in a rut.
Yeah, our beliefs have a tremendous impact on our behavior. And if we think about our perception of issues of avoiding conflict, how's that going for you? Having a high need for approval, wanting to be liked by everybody, how's that going?
I don't like to talk about money.
Yeah, I don't like to talk about money. I mean, these are people, sales coaches that can work on that perception and belief system that you have with those topics. And it's really tough to change it on your own. I had a session yesterday with somebody who hates conflict, and I'm giving him good stuff, good techniques, good approaches. And I go, are you comfortable with that? And he goes, no, I am not comfortable with that. I said, okay, let's talk about that. That's what we need to be able to spend the next 45 minutes on after I just shared the technique with you, is to how to get you comfortable using it. And I need to be able to influence their behavior so that they can have a different outcome when they apply it. Because if they don't influence the behavior, the outcome is going to be the same.
I'm going to go to number 5 here. They use their experience with others to help you overcome barriers, right?
Yeah, true.
The nice thing about working with a sales coach, Scott, is that they've seen a lot of different situations. They've helped other people overcome these kind of barriers that you're talking about, and they can help you to do that too. And sometimes, interestingly enough, a lot of these barriers we can't even see.
True.
They're so ingrained in who we are. I talk about when I was bringing up my kids, I never told them to not talk to strangers. I taught them to look for weird behaviors that would cause you to avoid somebody, whether it's a stranger or a friend, right? Because most challenges are friends' challenges. So be careful out there, always be careful, right? Don't talk to strangers. And now our kids are coming up in this world with an aversion to talking to people.
Right.
So how did we get brought up can have a big effect on how we think. Another thing that a sales coach can do is they can challenge you to do better with positive pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So telling you that you're able, that you're capable, looking at you from a way that maybe sees more in you than you see in yourself, and pushing you to do better because their pressure is positive, not you're going to get fired if you don't do this. They're on your side. That's the thing you really have to think about. And that's my last one. They give you a sounding board who's on your side. And I think that's the big difference between going to a coach and going to your sales manager, who might take it out on you later.
Yeah. And I think we're probably more prone to do something for somebody else than we are ourselves, because sometimes we've been taught, to do something for ourselves is selfish. But education at that point is selfish because it's just benefiting us. But what do we do with that education and that training is sharing it with others. So a sales coach can give you pressure. You can want to do something for another person more than you do it for yourself. And you end up becoming the winner of that because you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. And hopefully the sales coach is giving you all the credit, because the sales coach is going to share the same information with everybody in a class or everybody that they're working with. But it's the heroes that are going to apply it, that have the guts and courage. They're the ones that are the warriors in the battle, because they went out and they tried something new. And that's the most powerful part of change, is trying something new, like Bill said earlier.
Yeah, I think it's very different. I think it's very difficult to make change on our own, and having some kind of an outside helper, some kind of an outside visionary, especially one that's been through the sales process before, understands what it takes, understands the loneliness of being out there, can really be a good sounding board, and also someone who's going to help you see things in a very different way. So I think it's important for you to become the best salesperson you can, to look into the idea of a sales coach. To that end, one of the resources that I'm going to offer, and maybe you will as well, Scott, a year or so ago, we did a fast track sales coaching program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm going to offer that again. It's a very affordable way to get started. Kind of a short program. See if you like it, and see if you can work with a coach. So if that's something that's interesting to you, go on to our website, to the page, and there's a form there you can fill out to contact us, or go on to us on LinkedIn if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a great offer. Our golden nugget today is, remember, today is the tomorrow you worried about yesterday, by Dale Carnegie. So I'm really starting to get into the Dale Carnegie mood, and I really, I heard that quote, and I go, that is so powerful, especially when we talk about change and a sales coach and getting outside of our comfort zone and not worrying about tomorrow, but rather creating tomorrow based on what we do today. Ooh, that sounded pretty good.
Yeah, that is good. I think it's important, and Dale has a whole book on how to stop worrying and start living. That's not the book that we're going to do. But one of the most powerful things in there is to write down the things that are worrying you, put them in an envelope, and then open it up 3 months later and see if any of them really happened. And I think that's what he's talking about here, is that we worry about things that really aren't going to happen instead of doing something about them. And that's what Scott and I have been talking about, both with the book and with sales coaching. Go out and do something different and change your tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Take control of your tomorrow and make it better. I think that's a great quote, Scott. Thank you. Yeah. All this information is going to be at winningatselling.com. It's in our show notes, so look for it there. This is show number 562.
Next week, no book club. We're going to be starting the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. We have a surprise guest, and I'm going to give you a hint, though. Discovering the source of being world famous. So if you're curious about the source of being world famous, tune in next week with our special guest.
Please subscribe, share the podcast with your colleagues on your social media, connect with Scott and I on LinkedIn. Go out and get better, one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.